Welcome to Unlikely Intersections, the podcast where intent, impact, and inquiry inspire our conversations. Fascinating thing about intersections is we all face many intersections daily. The way we navigate these determines the trajectory of our day and our life. I'm Dr. Philip Brown with my good friend Dr. Terry Jackson, and you're at the intersection. We got an interesting episode today, the reset, and this follows a highly energetic episode that we had, one of our live episodes that was, I think, very powerful. And so if folks want to check out those live episodes, they'll figure out why we're saying we have to reset, because anytime you kind of have that mountaintop experience and you're so excited and something great happens, there's a huge tendency to either rest on your laurels, like I talked about in my UNCW commencement address, or the tendency to just have a little emotional ebb. So we're going to talk about how we work through that experience and basically keep the lights on.
Yeah, that was an extremely powerful episode, the last episode, and I'm still recovering from that. Thinking about all the concepts that we discussed, the emotional high of just having those types of conversations and all the topics. And, you know, we all in our life need to be able to reset every day, because we go through not only the emotional highs, but we have the emotional lows. And so how do we recover? How do we reset, right? And yet, how do we reset, but not necessarily reset at the same level? Meaning, with all of the emotional high that happened from the last episode, we should reset at a higher level than we were before we had that episode.
Yeah, a whole different starting point. And it comes with all kinds of things. One of the things that, you know, we see play out in the sports world, so let's go to where you and I spend a lot of time talking about sports. You know, if you have a team that does really well and have a lot of returning players, then that expectation for the next season is incredibly high.
Yes.
And that makes me think something near and dear to my heart, that UNC basketball team, who all the way to the national championship last year, almost everybody came back with a notable exception. The expectations are sky high, and yet that's a different team.
Yes.
They have to figure out the chemistry differently.
Yes.
And go through the process, the discipline of the process, to see how this year plays out. But they're not starting at zero, but they are restarting.
Yes, they're restarting at a higher level because of the expectation, probably not only from the country and the fans, but the expectation that they had for themselves. And so there's a lot of resetting that's happening because they're not playing as well at this point as they played last year.
Yeah, and, you know, I've had so many people talk about how they look at this point in time, right? Like, yeah, they really don't have it this year. Mm-hmm. It's going to be tough. And, you know, maybe they don't. But I'm reminded that at this point last year, it looked a little worse than it does at this point this year. And so I'm thinking it's another trust the process thing, right? Like they've got to collectively figure out how to embrace that process. Mm-hmm. They know that process has worked well, and so are they gonna be capable of embracing the process, going full into it wholeheartedly, or is this expectation mismatch that they have now gonna keep them stuck?
I agree with you, and the question is, after they had such a high last year when people didn't expect them to be as good and they got to the national championship, how did they reset? What was going on in their mind around their reset? Man, we're better than we thought. We had a better year than we thought we were going to have. So we got just about everybody coming back. Did they reset from a place of becoming complacent, even though they want a higher level? Because they just thought we were going to be UNC Chapel Hill again next year. We got all this talent coming back, and everybody's just going to fall at our feet because we're the Tar Heels. What was their mind telling them about the reset and how they should reset? That's what's always interesting.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it makes me think back to the some of the years of Carolina basketball when I was coming up, and I remember just a great picture one time, and it's the team that I believe it was the year after Carolina won the national championship, so maybe it was 1983, and you could see the scoreboard on the floor, the old scoreboard in old Carmichael Auditorium, and Carolina was winning. It was a big gap, maybe 20 points plus. But what you saw both Michael Jordan and Sam Perkins diving on the floor for a loose ball, even though they were up by a huge margin. And what that said was that these guys have embraced the process, right? They fundamentally reset on the heels of that national championship, and they know that day in, day out, it's got to be the discipline to do the little things, to practice hard, to play hard, to put themselves out on every opportunity.
You're absolutely correct. I remember being up there when they won the championship in '82 and going over to Franklin Street and seeing all that I saw that night after they won. But to embrace that and to say, hey, we have to come back next year and at a different level because we understand what it takes, but there's still a process. And as people look at this process, even within your organization, on your job, right, in your family, how do you reset from those moments of extreme emotional highs, right? You've had a lot of great things happen, and you're trying to come back to normal, right? Because you can't maintain that emotion. But the reset is higher. What do the expectations become as you move forward and trusting the process?
You're talking about the concept of the new reality.
Yes.
Right? Like the past has occurred. It can't be wiped off. It exists. Our collective past, our individual pasts shape who we are. And at the same time, build a new foundation for us. And we have to go forth from that point. And we see that one of the times that I recall that being difficult was in the aftermath of Hurricane Florence. And that was a tough time because we found ourselves, we had basically safely navigated the storm. I'm talking about at the hospital at this point, right? We had changed out teams from the team that was active during the storm itself to the team that was active in the aftermath. And the primary job at that point, and I sat at the top of the incident command structure at that point, was how do we get things back to a sustainable, normal function as reasonably quickly as we can, because we still have to take care of people. We still have to make sure that our staff is solid, is in a good place. We still have to do all the things we already did, but we have these issues that many things are way different. They're destroyed, literally. And at the same time, we've been on this emotional fevered pitch where you have this fantastic camaraderie that's been built, right? Like, we're building daisy lines to unload helicopters with provisions coming in, right? And, it is an emotional high, but then there is and we still have these things to do that folks are counting on us to do and do well.
The reset, I remember my last position in corporate America, right beside me in a different office, there was this young lady that sat there. She was an attorney for the company. And I remember one morning getting in early, and she says, "Terry, come over to my office real quick." So I go to her office, and on her laptop, she has these pictures. And on these pictures, there was a group of people who had just climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. And she pointed at her sister And she says, there's no one in our family who would have ever thought that she would have been the one to climb a mountain. She was quiet. She was pretty reserved. She wasn't, I guess, the best of the students in our family. And we look up and we receive these pictures, and it's her at the top of the mountain. And I was like, wow. I said, but everyone has their own mountain, whether it's climbing, Mount Kilimanjaro, whether it's something in their career, there's some goal, some aspiration that they have that is their mountain. I said, but now she can conquer everything because she's conquered climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. How does she now reset her life? Because wherever the reset is, it's much higher than it was before, given that feat. And that's what we're that's what we are talking about today. Everybody has their own mountain to climb. And once you achieve that, the reset, how do you come back in such a way that everything else you do is at a very high level, much higher than where you were performing before because of the feat that you accomplished?
The fascinating thing about that is it's kind of the mountaintop experience, right? And one of the things in my personal life that happened a lot as a young man, high school and even younger, was we would go to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes annual conference in Black Mountain, North Carolina. And from a religious standpoint, that was always not only literally, but figuratively a mountaintop experience because it's based on athletics and the camaraderie that you always have around that. But also in those huddle groups, which were our teams, of groups of fellow athletes, and you competed together, but you also studied God's word and studied the Bible, and you would have sessions, actually would sing together, which was always interesting to have hundreds of, athletes who aren't necessarily singers singing together, but always worked out.
Right.
But, it left you with such a powerful mountaintop experience, a powerful sort of fundamental feeling that when we would descend the mountain and come back from Black Mountain, North Carolina to Wilmington, it was, okay, now what? And it's the concept of, okay, how do I put some of these things into practice? Because the reality of it is, in many respects, our life's journey is a series of mountaintops. And a lot of times we may not even see the next mountaintop until we get to a mountaintop.
Right.
And then we look and we say, wow, there's a higher peak up there. Oh, but you mean I got to go back down and back up to get to it? And that's the real challenge, I think, a lot of times, is that you're bringing that same energy. You're bringing the same climbing skills that got you to that mountaintop and now trying to apply it to this mountaintop. And the temptation a lot of times is to get discouraged as you go backwards and as you go back up through tough places. But that's where the process of trusting the process, of using the skills, and of understanding that it's really hard to make that climb alone. You need other people to help you through the tough spots comes in.
It's interesting because I tell people, friends, close friends all the time, I said, every time I start a new venture, there's always a valley and there's a peak, the mountaintop, so to speak. And my mountaintops are always higher every time. And as I reflect back over that, I said, now what the goal is how to minimize the valleys and optimize the mountaintops. Meaning that I'm at a much, much higher mountaintop, but maybe not come down as far into the valley to get to the next mountaintop. That's what's been, for me, very, very interesting as my life, if I look at my life journey. some of the accomplishments. I remember when I decided that I wanted to pursue my PhD. I didn't do it because I was working for someone. I was working for myself already. I was doing pretty decently from an income perspective. And I just asked myself the question. It was the challenge of the mountaintop. And the question was, what next? As you just said, what do I do next? I considered law school. I don't want to do that. Don't want to get caught up in the criminal justice system. Don't like the way that it is. So I'm not going to go to law school to become an attorney. So I'll do the PhD. All right. And so what next? And so, you go into corporate America, you're successful at what you do. And okay, consulting company. What next? Right? So it's always looking for a higher mountaintop. As you said, there are going to be different obstacles with every mountain that you're climbing. But once you get there, the high is so high, how do you reset at a higher level for the next mountaintop?
Yeah, that's a great model. I use a little different model personally. Like, I try to think of sometimes as that descent back down into the valley, a lot of times is physically easier, right? Like, and so one of the things I've learned about myself over years of trying to figure out who this guy is that a lot of times when the challenge is out of something, I lose interest pretty quick. Mm-hmm. But if I lose interest because the challenge is out, there's also opportunity that gets lost with that. Mm-hmm. So I think of that descent into something as being a time where, in theory, I can recover, right? Like I can breathe a little bit easier, right? And I'm still using my muscles, right? Because, going down is sometimes harder on your muscles than going up in a lot of ways, but it's easier on your wind. Mm-hmm. So it's just an opportunity to kind of reset a little bit and understand what has to come next. Mm-hmm. And most of the time when I look back on the structure of those peaks and valleys, I realized that the majority of my time was spent somewhere in the middle.
Right.
Wasn't at the bottom.
Right.
Wasn't at the top. The vast majority of time has been spent somewhere in the middle. And I like to ask myself, have I been enjoying this time in the middle? Because that's most of it. Mm-hmm. So, if I'm living with satisfaction only when I'm at the peak, I'm gonna spend a lot of time disappointed.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
And so, am I seeing what's there to be seen? Am I enjoying the people along the way in the middle ground, which is where most of my time is a constant question I like to ask myself.
And the question I ask myself in that same moment is, what am I learning? Or what do I need to learn to get to that next mountaintop, whatever it may be, right? What are the learning experiences that I need to have? Who do I need to connect with? What do I need to visit that's different? It's about, if you're going to the next mountaintop, it's got to be different, right? It's like the book that Marshall wrote, what got you here won't get you there, right? And so I've been to one mountaintop, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the process that I utilize to get to that mountaintop is going to be the same process as the next mountaintop. So that's the real growth. Me, again, getting to know who I am, what I need to learn, what I need to do. And people will understand once they look at this particular episode, what practices do I need to put in place?
Yeah.
Right, those incremental practices.
All about the practices, right? And it's interesting because when I think about the reset, I also think about where we are now worldwide at this stage of several years of pandemic. It is a fundamental reset. It's a different hill to climb. It is 100% predictable that it can't be the same climb that took us anywhere else, right? This is a new climb. In theory, we have our legs back under us. We're not breathing hard, like now it's time to reassert ourselves with discipline, with daily practices, to get to somewhere that we've never been before, but that we can see, and I certainly hope, as somebody who's spent a lot of time in healthcare, I hope that is a state that involves better health for everyone, I think that's really what's been missing across really our nation for sure, but truly worldwide, right? Like we have had a tremendous tendency to leave people behind.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, because there are no unimportant people, at some point, every person is an important part of understanding what's necessary for the next leg of the climb. And to me, that's where we are. How do we put that together? What's the process that we understand who and what is missing and apply that to get to the next level?
I would agree. And one of the things that I'm curious about, because I keep seeing it regardless of where we travel, we keep hearing about all of the jobs that are available. But yet we keep with the people not fulfilling the jobs. During the pandemic, of course, certain people left their occupations. But I'm trying to figure out, how are those people surviving if they chose not to go back to work? And where did all these jobs come from? And in what sectors? And are they higher paying positions or lower paying positions? And what are the people doing who decided not to go back to work? How are they funding their life? Because all of that is a reset. We haven't seen anything like this before, because I keep hearing about, this, and I'm like, so where are they? I want to say the numbers may be north of 3 million as it relates to deaths inside the United States as a result of, and you would know better than myself, as a result of the pandemic. But that was a very, very small number compared to our population. So what happened? And a lot of those were elderly. So where are the people working? And how are they making their living? That's very interesting, because they're not receiving the support of the government any longer. Where are they? What are they doing? That's a part of the reset that I'm trying to understand.
I am too. I mean, it's fascinating. The healthcare industry is basically on life support. I mean, there's not a better way to put it, right? And that life support is because so many of the frontline people, in particular nurses, have left the field. I mean, or at least left that component of the environment in the acute care setting. They're just not there in the numbers that they were. And so it creates a competition for those. I can tell you that right now, when we look at the surveys, physicians are also looking for ways out. When you look at the surveys, and half of the people who are responding to it say they would like to find a way to make a living otherwise, then you really have to take that as a caution and understand that, there is something disrupted there. And you have to understand, it kind of reminds me of, an exploratory operation as a surgeon, right? Which, a certain number of the operations that have to be done are exploratory to understand what's wrong. But one thing about it, if we don't remain curious enough to figure out what's wrong, then we'll do the wrong operation to fix it, because you have to know the answer to that. And we are really seeing that right now, because you have multiple factors, right? You got this profound workforce shortage, but you also have massive revenue shortfalls in most healthcare systems across the country. And so what behavior rectifies that, runs a spectrum, right? But the grand tendency is to do the thing that we know is not viable, which is to try to do it again the same way, to try to rebuild something that no longer fits the situation, to retreat toward the primacy of the acute care environment, for instance. That's probably not going to work, right? Like that particular approach has run its course. So how do we reevaluate what really needs to happen? Who's missing in that discussion, right? How, those are the questions we have to grapple with.
Something just crossed my mind when we're talking about this thing called the reset. How long does the reset occur? That's the question. How long does it occur? Do you just sit and relax and rest and let time pass by? Or is the reset just a part of a continuum? As you continue to move along, there's a reset that happens over a period of time so that you can move toward whatever the next mountain is. And I guess it's going to be different for everybody.
Yeah, it gets me to one of your sayings, you acting your way to thinking sometimes. Like, it's not really reasonable for us to think that there are a lot of ready-made solutions to a new reality. And we're going to experience everything that's going on right now in the way we tell ourselves we are. You know, whatever labels we attach to it will become our experience for sure. And so it's a good time to fundamentally use caution in how we label things. And at the same time, we can't lose sight of a mountaintop that's out there, right? We want to get back to that because we know what that experience is like, right? And so for North Carolina Health, you know, maybe that mountaintop is 2030, and maybe it is one of the top 10 healthiest states in the nation, which in theory is actually a lower bar than it used to be because all the states are less healthy, as are we. But can we do things differently enough to ascend those rankings from mid-30s, where we've always dwelled as a state, to top 10, maybe even number 1 over that period of time? And that has to be a journey. That has to be a process that we embrace. It's got to have different components than we've put into it before. I'm excited that it's actually possible. And, you know, I see evidence of it everywhere I look. We have a dashboard that can measure health across states at population levels, state, and all the way down to census block levels, neighborhoods, right? So it gives us the tools we need to be able to chart a different course. The question is, have we got guts enough to do it?
The courage to do it, right? Which is another key word that we've discussed in a lot of our episodes. You got to have the courage to do it. And we, in the last episode, we heard along the spectrum, we've heard hypocrisy, aspirations, and on the far right end, you know, help remind me what he our last guest, in the last episode, it was hypocrisy. He talked about aspirations, and then on the very extreme.
And basically, it's when you're there, right? It's when you're fully consistent with everything that you value.
Exactly. And so we have to be able to measure ourselves against that, right? We have to be able to reflect against that. And a lot of that kind of happens, that reflection and that measurement happens kind of simultaneously, because you have to keep moving. You can't just stand still as you're looking at what progress it takes to get to that next mountaintop. And when I say standing still, it may not be a physical movement, but it may be the learning process. What do I need to learn to get there from that, you know, on that spectrum, with courage being probably the underpinning of it all?
One of the things that I've seen many different ways throughout my whole life is that there is a tremendous tendency to retreat back somewhere that you've been, that worked out okay, that, you know, you're having an illusion that if you just get back there, things will be okay. In my experience, that's rarely been the case, right? You can't really go back because the world has changed. It's like, you know, a man never steps into the same river twice, because the man's different and the river's different. And that's really what we're talking about, is how you navigate that. You know, one of the sayings in our last episode that was so powerful is, don't swim alone.
That's right.
Don't swim alone.
That's right.
Right?
That's
How many
right.
times do we hear that? And that's so powerful, because when things are confusing, you just need help.
Yep.
You just need help.
Yep. And it's oftentimes you can't help yourself because you need the perspective of someone else, right? It has to be, as one of your favorite words, there has to be some interdependence with another human being that you can trust to share your thoughts and to give you perspective, as you call them, your personal board of trustees, right? That you can go to and you can communicate with, and you can use them as a sounding board. They can give you perspective. It helps you move along and see things differently, because life is all about perspective.
Absolutely. And context is always decisive. So the story that we're telling ourselves at any given time is what ultimately sets that context. And if that context is not broad enough, or if it's pointing us in a direction that's not consistent with what the world is allowing at that time, then we're just going to be beating our head against the wall.
And that's not a pleasant thing to do. I don't like doing that because I like to be in motion, and I want that motion to be progress, right? Because motion is motion, whether you're falling back or you're making progress, but you have to be in motion. And so to beat my head up against the wall means I'm in the same place. And I'm not going to do that. I make that a point to keep that a part of my awareness, that I'm not going to beat my head up against the wall. We're going to make a decision. We're going to move one way or one way or the other. We're going to move, right? But I'm not going to stand there just beating my head up against the wall. So we have to be decisive, right? And in the reset, even though it might be a time of reflection and a time where we become social and we rest a little bit, there's still motion, because there's still learning that's taking place in that process. And again, as you've said, trust the process, right? Because the process is the process. And regardless of how uncertain it may appear, how ambiguous it may appear, we still got to trust the process and keep moving.
Yeah, and you said it. There's a tremendous tendency to get discouraged if you're, feel like you're going backwards. But a lot of times you got to go backwards to go forwards. Like mountain switchbacks, right? Like you can only take a certain steepness of ascent, and so you do have to level out, sometimes go backwards, go around. There are obstacles that may not have even existed on your original map, but you get there and you're like, we can't cross this here. We got to go back and take a little different path and get to a different place where we can cross whatever this obstacle is. And sometimes that's a time where folks get discouraged. But the truth is that may just have to be the path at that point in time. It doesn't have to change where you're really ultimately headed. Although what you might find is that reroute, that going backwards, enables you to find an even better destination. It's kind of the old theory of never be so in love with what you want that you wouldn't take something better.
That's right. It's a constant evaluation, right, of not necessarily the process, but the steps of the process, right? And as you said, we run into the obstacles, and you kind of evaluate what path do I take. And instead of obstacle, we come to an intersection. And which angle do I take from this intersection so that I can achieve? Because that's what this is really about, right? We've come to an unlikely intersection in our path. And now I need to determine, given what this is, which angle I'm going to take to continue to move forward so that I can ultimately take the right angle that takes me to that mountaintop.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. Sometimes we get a little glimpse of what might be. It kind of reminds me, you get to a place and, maybe at that intersection it says, beware of bears going this way. Or if you go, the other way, you're never going to be able to get to where this path went, but maybe it's a little safer. And so you got to make a value judgment. And that's where things come back to, knowing what your values were in the first place.
That's right.
and having the courage to follow whatever they are.
You know, it's interesting because what I just thought about was I remember being in the office in Columbus when I worked there, and I remember probably the third year into the position, and I was like, wow, you know, this is a neat position to be in. I could see myself here for a long time, and we were winning. We were making all of our numbers. Everything was going great. The whole team was winning, and then there was a disruption that made you evaluate. And the disruption was just a change of who our leader was, our manager was. But he was totally different. And so there was a reset. You had to reevaluate. This guy's different. He makes the culture a little bit different. I became comfortable with what the culture was because of all the success we were having. But now comes the disruption. So what I do, I always told myself I wanted to start a consulting business. So let me get back on that path, right? I got to a place of resting where everything was comfortable. Then all of a sudden the disruption. And so look at the values, having the courage to move forward, understanding what the ultimate goal was, right? And sometimes we take a look at things that are disruptive as if we place a negative connotation on it initially, right? It takes a little bit of time to understand that in trusting the process, more than likely that disruption will become something positive in your life. And it goes back to what Dr. Rao says in CPM, and I don't think we've got to it in our course yet, but he says, good, bad, who knows?
That's right. That's right. And you might as well tell yourself whatever story, because that's going to be it. And I know for sure, like in my life, those disruptions have always been the genesis for something new,
Yes.
right? Like, I was a middle school teacher and coach, disrupted that and became a physician, became a surgeon. I was an academic vascular surgeon for a couple of years, disrupted that, became a private practice vascular surgeon, and ultimately, a medical staff leader. Totally disrupted that, became a health system executive, all with basically higher and higher mountaintops in terms of my ability to impact numbers of people and scale and everything that we talk about. And none of those things were smooth, right? You had to weather whatever the disruption was, and then you had to regroup. And I can remember vividly in my first year as an executive, just being frustrated. I was basically ready to go back to practice, but I'd put myself on a certain time frame that I knew I had to ride that out. And one of the great things about having executive positions a lot of times is that coaching comes with it. And as somebody who's been in athletics, I really believe everybody ought to have coaching, even if it's informal. But so, you take different assessments of yourself and everything like that. And I can remember sitting there with the person who was coaching me at the time, and he's looking at these things, and he's like, I can't quite figure this out. He said, and then it hit him, and he mentioned it. He says, results. He says everything about all your personality says you have to have results. You have to have that to be satisfied as a person. Your whole persona is geared toward that. And that was an epiphany for me, right? Because I realized that while I was in the right process, I didn't really have the right destination in mind, right? I needed to have that destination not from the standpoint of I have to get here but it was directional, right? And so I would then be able to see, okay, I've got this destination. Is this thing that I'm leading, is it moving in that direction, right? didn't really matter if it ultimately got all the way there, right? Kind of like the Dalai Lama, if something is good, if something is noble, whether it's achieved in your lifetime is largely irrelevant. You just need to strive and persevere and never give up. And so once I realized that about myself, that, I definitely needed to have a goal, but that goal was not for the purpose of specific achievement. It was for the horizon of where I was trying to take things and where I was trying to lead. Fundamentally changed so much and put me in a space of having a good time again and really enjoying leadership and leading people and coaching teams and making cool things happen.
That's interesting because what I had found about myself throughout the corporate was something a little different, and that is I wanted the direction, I wanted the goal, and I wanted the direction. But at the end of a specific period of time, there was the result. It was the number, right? So at the end of the quarter, end of 6 months, the end of the year, I made the number. That was closure, and then I can move on to the next year. So I found that about myself, and so with that, I had to get to the point where maybe there wasn't a number, right? But if the direction was in the same, it was the direction that I wanted to go. It's more of along the vision and trusting the process that I didn't need to necessarily have the number. So that's where I've been. I went from needing to have the number for the closure to I don't necessarily need the number now, even though I'm still a results-oriented person and I like the number. I like to be able to see the closure of whatever the task is, but I don't necessarily need it now. I can navigate both, if you will.
Yeah, and one of the things that happened to me along that journey is the less I worried about the number, the higher the number ended up being, right? So like some of the, embracing, in my case, the people that were doing the work, really entrusting them to do things. We did some incredible things, those teams that led our accountable care organization put it like in the top 5 in the country out of 4. I mean, it was amazing to see what could actually happen when we set that direction and we trusted people to do what they could do well, and we counted on them, and they ended up delivering so many times in a multiple of what anybody could really even wildly expect.
It's magical because I've been there, right? It's like, hey, we need to, as they call them, the stretch numbers, right? We need stretch numbers from everyone. And so I trusted the sales team to make the stretch numbers happen. And then all of a sudden, one of the goals that I wanted to achieve when I went to the company is to be the best director in the company one year that I was there. And in 2011, it happened because I trusted the team. And all of a sudden, here we are 128% to goal, which was the best in the company. And I've been told that the sweetest sound that you can ever hear is the sound of your name. The second sweetest sound is that at what you were achieving, what you were seeking to do, that you were the best. There's no better 2 words. And I like to say the best. In 2011, I was the best in the company. Our division was the best. And now the other years, we were always within the top 5. But that year, we were the best. And so the reset from that was, how do we make it happen next year? And so the energy, the excitement of being the best drove, of course, how do we become the best next year? Because we've always been in the top 5, but it's different. Well, we're in the top 5 versus being the best.
That's an intersection. And so, you get to this place, you're at that juncture, right? And you can either play it the way you know that is going to get you close to that, or you can auto disrupt and say, I think we might be able to do even better.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's a leap of faith sometimes, right? And we get into that ties into all kinds of topics, some of which we've discussed, you know, like executive compensation being tied to specific goals. And what that really does is limit the goal, right? Because you're going to set the goal low enough to be attained and get that compensation. And it's basically, it's that old phenomenon, right? Only one who's willing to go too far can find out how far one can get.
That's right.
Right. And so if you're setting things up in such a way that you have to hit a specific number to get there, then you're rarely gonna exceed that number by very much. But if you're in a situation where you're setting that number as a ballpark, and where you're able to fully focus on the process, and by process, I want to make sure we include people, right? It is how you, as a leader, it's all about how you treat the people, how you enable their work, how you make it possible for them to understand exactly what you're counting on them for, and cut them loose. And basically, when you're able to do that, it's amazing how far you can exceed that performance.
You know, you're so correct in that. You know, I went into the position saying I was going to use a specific language, and I use that language with the team all the time. I work with you, not you work for me, or he works for me, or she works for me. No, we work together. And my success is based upon how successful you are. Your success is my success. I won't have any success unless you're successful. In utilizing that type of language and creating a culture and such that they understood that they were more important than I was as their quote unquote leader, it created a huge cultural shift in that division. And the key to our success also was there were other divisions who would have down years, and then they would bounce back and have the next year would be better than a down year. We never had any down years. It was always the next mountaintop, the next peak, right? The entire business grew. It didn't grow because we were 98% one year and we come back the following year and we were 105%, but that's 105% of a lower number. No, we were 128% of a higher number that we had the year before. So it was 5 years of nothing but growth, no downtime, right? And I attribute that to the team and the language that was used and how we embraced success, but not only that, how we embraced the challenge of being successful, which meant that we had to become someone totally different year after year. I made a post on Facebook last week. I said, how do you handle change? Why don't you try go bowling and go bowling with the opposite, go bowling with the opposite hand, right? We would do that on a regular basis because it made us feel awkward, but we had to embrace being awkward, and it enabled us to think a little bit differently and see things a little bit differently, right? From a different perspective that allowed us to continue to be successful year in and year out.
Yeah, it's a fascinating approach, that whole, drive a different way to work.
That's right.
Or, eat left-handed, and bowl left-handed.
That's right. That's right.
Whatever it is, and it's interesting. Being able to free your team up to do great things is so important. And, I've been in a situation where, we had a team that was functioning so much higher than the rest of the system that from the basis of the system imposed goals, they were actually lower than our current performance, right? Because it was all just about how you get the system, and it take each one this to get, And I knew we had magic when basically all my physician and administrative leaders said, no, they can put that for our goal, but our goal is going to be
That's right.
to increase, right?
That's right.
To get to do, because we were talking about how we are taking care of of patients, right? We're talking about how we take care of their diabetes, how we take care of their certain cancer screenings. We're like, oh no, we're not going backwards. I mean, our real goal is perfect.
That's right.
You know, but what we want for this year is to go from X to X plus. We're never going to take X minus because that's just not how we're built.
It's a whole lot of magic in that, and people just don't understand. The magic for us was other sales people saying, "Look, can we transfer into your district, into your region? Can we come to work in the Columbus, Ohio office because we understand the culture that's going on, in there, and how people are succeeding and people are happy at the same time, right?" And we would have these meetings, every other week, and every month we read a different book. It may not have even been related to business, but it was about how we were thinking. How do we give us a different perspective? So when I face an obstacle and I have to reset, how do I respond? Because that's where the true magic is. It's how do you respond to whatever the obstacle is?
Yeah, you're building a culture with that reading, right? Like you're building a common language, you're building, a common culture. And I love that example of folks wanting to come to Columbus. I can't imagine why anybody would want to come. Must have been pretty special. Just kidding. But the truth of it is that it kind of gets to one of the fundamentals that I've always believed in, and that is you can't demand respect. You can't demand engagement and expect to get it beyond a certain level. Your behavior, the environment that you create, actually commands that, right? In other words, people see that behavior is worthy of being a part of. And so what you really are trying to do is create people who believe, and kind of Ted Lasso-ish, right? Like, I believe and believe, right? And you take these people who believe in these common things, and that's where the real magic happens, right? You can't demand it.
Nope.
You can't say, here's the list, you got to do I mean, you can say that, and people often do. And people even may execute those things, but it'll never be at the level of somebody who really believes what you're doing.
That's right.
Ever.
That's right. I believed in my team. I told them I believed in them. So there were little nuances about the company. If you work within 45 minutes of the office, you got to come into the office. No, you won't have to come into the office because at the end of the month, you know what the number's supposed to be. I believe in you enough that you can do all those little things and play around all you want to, but at the end of the month what has to happen. And we far exceeded it every month.
Yeah. I mean, you were doing flex work before flex work was
Exactly.
a cool thing.
Exactly.
Well, I think we have executed on our reset. Of course, our listeners will ultimately tell us by the engagement on
Absolutely.
on this podcast, but really want to thank everybody for sticking with us. It's been a great intersection this time, on the heels of something I hope you'll go look for and find out, which I think is just an incredible episode. But if you want to track us down, I want to announce today that I've got a new website that has gone live this week, docphilipbrown.com. And, of course, you can always find me on LinkedIn at Doc Philip Brown. You can find us at unlikelyintersection.com. And you can find us on Facebook as well as YouTube at Unlikely Intersections. And Terry, where can we find you these days?
You can find me at LinkedIn, Terry Jackson, PhD. You can find me on Facebook. And it's been a great reset after having an episode that was extremely emotionally charged and high. That was great to be a part of that conversation. And hopefully you'll understand why we said that. And it was another great intersection.
We'll see you at the next intersection.